All right, good morning, good evening, good night. This is the Layer 1 podcast. We are interviewing founders, co-founders, thought leaders in the space in crypto and NFTs. I have a thought leader and founder in the space here with me, Yat Siu. My moderators made sure that I said your name correctly. I know the first couple times I did not do that, so hopefully I got it right, Yat. Yat is one of the first, I believe the first person to come on the Layer 1 podcast 3 times. I'd have him on all the time if I could. He is the co-founder of Animoca Brands. We will get to a great conversation here about NFTs, about Rev Motorsport, about growing the play-to-earn economy. Yat, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me. And I do remember when we first spoke, maybe some years ago. So great to be here.
Yeah, all those light years ago. I do want to give a quick shout out to Rev Motorsport. You guys are the sponsor for us this month, so I appreciate that very much. Rev Motorsport is a gaming motorsport metaverse that leverages emerging and cutting edge technologies to provide true digital ownership to players, fans, and collectors. The ecosystem includes great motorsport brands such as F1 Delta Time, MotoGP Ignition, and Formula E High Voltage, and they have that Rev token that ties all of the ecosystem together and makes it a true play-to-earn economy. So thank you again for sponsoring us this month. You guys have been friends of ours for a long time. So excited to basically start this episode, man. I love to kind of have broad discussions with you about the NFT space because you're so knowledgeable and have been for a while. It's been an adventure, as you said early on. Last time I talked to you, or first time I talked to you was 2019. So many things have happened since then. I don't even know where to start. Let's break down Animoca Brands first, and then see where we go.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess maybe just quick introduction. So, after all, I mean, the NFT space has grown by so much, right? It used to be a club of people that all knew each other, and now there's all these new people coming in. So, might make sense to reintroduce Animoca Brands a little bit. We are a company that has basically been focused on NFTs really since late 2017. It kicked off really with our involvement with CryptoKitties, where basically we ended up becoming the publishers for CryptoKitties, in January of 2018 in our part of the world, and also an early investor in Dapper Labs. And since then, when we saw what the potential was on non-fungible tokens, we went all in. So since last we spoke, just putting up a very quick sort of slide here, you can see a little brief history. We've done actually over 80 investments in the field. We have also done multiple actual initiatives of our own. Today we might be talking a little bit about our Rev, but you may have heard of Sandbox, with the land sales and the Sand token. That is actually our project. It's part of the Animoca Brands group, or Gamey, or Quid, or Tower, right? And then we have, of course, many of our earliest portfolios. We led the initial round and subsequent investments into Axie Infinity, back in the day. And it was fascinating because we were the lead investor, and actually it was a hard and difficult raise for $800,000. It seems, ridiculous that would have been difficult way back when, but it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we're also in Wax, in Decentraland, in Bitsky, in OpenSea, right? I mean, a whole range of companies that we've been in the space. And that's primarily because we had high conviction that this was going to be big. We didn't know necessarily who are going to be winners, and that wasn't the point. The point was to help seed the ecosystem, to help grow it, because there was no way that we could do everything ourselves. And in an inclusive manner, we wanted to sort of ideally help everyone. And there weren't that many companies, so it wasn't hard to find them, frankly speaking. Today, of course, it's quite different. So yeah, it's a great honor for us to be in this moment where we can continue to help. We just recently launched an accelerator with Brink, where the deadline is on the 22nd, but really that was sort of another idea here to help bring more people in the NFT space. And we've had lots of applications come in, so that's looking pretty exciting as well. So everything around helping build the ecosystem is kind of what Animoca Brands has been about and continues to do to help build this sort of open metaverse.
I could look at that infographic all day. I mean, it's a who's who now of NFT projects. What has been the most surprising to you? I know Axie Infinity, an $800,000 raise, and now it is the top performer in the NFT space. But of those brands within that little infographic that you showed, what has been some of the more surprising projects that you said, wow, I didn't see that coming so fast?
Well, I mean, I would
All of it.
say all of it, right? I mean, because I think when we invested and when we built in the space, we were definitely had high conviction that it was going to happen. But the fact that it happened so fast and so suddenly was actually perhaps the biggest surprise, right? I
Mhm.
mean, people forget that, today Axie Infinity, monthly revenue run rate rivals that of Roblox, right? But 6 months ago, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's that kind of that kind of sort of that kind of alpha. I think the one other thing that also perhaps was a very pleasant surprise was around things like the sandbox. I mean, sandbox again, we always felt had value, but the fact that people are clamoring to buy land and that it sells out within seconds is fascinating as well. And I think now it seems obvious, perhaps, but back then was not that easy to comprehend because after all, it's virtual land. You can't really feel and touch it in the same sense.
Hmm.
And I think all of that, what's happening in the space, has also helped sort of our thinking and our articulation in the space because we've now come to appreciate that actually our virtual life is perhaps much more important. And maybe even our physical life is, in fact, much more virtual than we care to admit. As a result, the transition from the physical to the virtual, maybe we're already in that space. We just are, we don't appreciate the fact that our life is effectively already 99% virtual in effect. And so the
Yeah.
transition will happen much faster.
Our first couple interviews were more educational based, right? It felt like we were kind of teaching people about NFTs. Now, it doesn't seem like that is, I mean, that is still necessary. We're still very early, but it seems much more focused on the details that are happening within the NFT space. Can you break down one thing now that was maybe similar to past interviews in your conviction? How did you get to this point where you were seeing the NFT space, seeing the NFT industry, and saying, this is the next thing? I remember specifically talking about mobile, you being in the mobile industry as it blew up. What led you to the point where you could have the frame of mind and say, NFTs are the next thing?
There's a lot, right? And without going into the details, the one very big conviction that has stayed the same throughout and hasn't changed at all is around the fact that gaming and true digital ownership actually go hand in hand because we already have a virtual relationship that is actually one that feels physical and is emotional and is actually valuable to us, despite the fact that it is virtual. When I buy a skin in a game, not a blockchain game, but just any game, or I buy a virtual asset, whether it be a sword or a car or something, that purchase feels real to me. It
Mm,
feels something I ought to own. And most of us don't realize that when you buy an asset inside a game that is not on blockchain, that is not an NFT, you don't own that. And that is something that really you begin to understand only after you've played games and you've been betrayed
yes.
time and time again when the game shuts down or when the game developer changes the rules because of their own needs, right? And so that's the conviction that we had at the beginning. And we always felt that the free to play model, which really had noble beginnings, but ultimately to survive became exploitative as a business model. And that was uneasy for us. And so this is just the better model because the tax or the take rate, whatever you want to call it,
Mm,
was actually fair as opposed to one where you obtain nothing. So I think the gaming and NFT angle for us was always high conviction. Although gaming, interesting enough, was not the actual application that brought NFTs to the initial mainstream of the conversation. It was collectibles and art. But
mm,
gaming definitely today rules the platform, I would say, in terms of utility and usefulness for NFTs. And I think will continue onwards. If you look at Axie Infinity, to me, Axie Infinity is the Angry Birds moment of blockchain gaming and NFTs. Right? It is not to say that every person in the world is going to play Axie Infinity, but everyone will have heard of blockchain gaming and NFTs because of it. And a whole new generation of people are now playing blockchain games who have never been doing crypto before because of Axie Infinity. And guess what's happening? They're out there looking for other games to play
mhm.
where they can have fun and generate yield or have ownership. And that sort of flywheel effect, that sort of growth is happening right now. And we're witnessing this across all of our ecosystems. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, a lot of the prediction that you made in 2019 with the growth of the play to earn economy, all the things you're talking about here, you predicted it back in our first interview. I wonder if that timeline is still the same. I think maybe we just didn't know. Every time I would speak to you, it's like, wow, it's picking up. Wow, it's picking up. And yet we're here. So I want to tie in a quick question from the community. One thing that's really awesome about the Layer 1 podcast is that we go live, but we're also on audio platforms, and it stays, obviously on YouTube afterwards. The question from DP is, he was asking, would love to know what the main catalyst of Axie catching on in the Philippines was. Was that demographic intentional, or was it happenstance? And I want to tie this in with the entire kind of NFT industry right now. What was the inflection point? Can you think of a time? I know SLP had that moment where it shot up in value in like one day, and it led to a lot of interest. From your perspective, what's the inflection point?
So the inflection point, we think, and I don't think this is just true for sort of Axie Infinity, I think it's for every project really, is less to do with the speculative nature of the token. I think it's natural for people in the crypto world to think of that because we pay attention to prices because it's the nature of the trading mentality, which I fully appreciate and understand. But the longevity of the result doesn't come from a price pump. The longevity comes from utility, from usefulness. And so you need to consider a few factors. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Axie team perhaps was best uniquely positioned to do that. And by the way, it's not just Axie, it's a combination of the pre-early days of what ultimately became Yield Guild games, right? That combination is actually what created this effect. And I'll get to exactly how that works and why NFTs actually provided for that opportunity. But really, the Axie inflection moment was the ability to essentially combine capital, which is essentially the sort of manager program, together which they can then issue the scholarships, which basically people who didn't have the assets but actually could use it in a kind of a rental type model and share the revenue. And essentially combining similar to a taxi medallion. I own a taxi medallion, but I can basically rent it out to someone and generate yield, and therefore combine the benefits of capital and that of labor and create an economy out of that. That is what Axie had built. And if you recall in our interview, perhaps even back in 2019, I was talking about the potential of the rental model, right? And that is, of course, something that Axie has realized, but it couldn't happen if it wasn't for the initiatives of what Gabby and Beryl and that team did, which ultimately led to YGG, because they saw an opportunity to help their communities. And I think the other thing was, the circumstance, right, is the fact that it was COVID. And with COVID, people couldn't do their physical jobs. And therefore, they had to find another avenue. And that actually ended up becoming Axie, right time, right place. Right? And I think there's an interesting expression about where you can take that best opportunity. And that basically is, when luck sort of meets preparation, right? So you could be prepared all your life, but when that circumstance doesn't happen, maybe it never takes off, right? But if the circumstance comes and you're simply not prepared, it doesn't matter how lucky you are, you're not going to be in a position to do that. If you didn't have a game that was ready at that moment in time, if you didn't happen to have the Philippines struggling from COVID at the time, maybe Axie wouldn't have taken off the way that it has. But here we are, right? And moments in history, in terms of where these explosive moments happen, always happen in a combination of these things. You can't predict them fully, but you have conviction and it'll happen. So it'll happen slowly, organically, or explosively, as we have seen in the space. So to me, it was a social need. It was a circumstance that required it. The price sort of explosion that happened afterwards is the consequence of the activity, meaning actually you could look at the Axie token and as, SLP as a sort of more fundamental analysis as opposed to one that is sort of more speculative in nature because people really need and use it. So that's I think where the Axie component comes in. Now, why was NFT so critical to this? Is because that whole development came organically and came community driven in a peer-to-peer manner, meaning that people could build out these sort of scholarship programs without actually interfacing and seeking permission from Axie, or in this case, Sky Mavis directly. Which basically means that anyone could really sort of build out the program and rent out their assets and build their own business and do other things, right? And we see this in indirect manners as well, where people might take your assets and your NFTs and then, turn them into loan products or sort of, fractionalize them, right? That was sort of an early beginning as well, where people can take your assets and do new things that you yourself, never imagined. But actually, you don't control that anymore. And in fact, that is a beautiful thing because it means more people can participate and grow that in. Now, if you think of the physical world, when you actually make a purchase decision of any asset, say like a car, your decision tree isn't based on just the car itself. It's actually based on everything around it. If I'm buying an electric car, is a charging station next to it? Are there enough mechanics around it? Are my friends using it? What do reviews say, right? What does an independent person say? What do my best friends say, right? These are external factors that, whether it's a Tesla or a Mercedes or Volkswagen, do not control, right? That actually becomes your decision tree where you decide to buy a car. The car or whatever asset you buy is only one element of it. It looks beautiful, it rides well, but everything else comes external. That's actually the value part. And in the traditional digital world, that wasn't possible because there was no external part. Everything was guided and controlled simply by the owner of the asset who rents it to you. Therefore, there is no external economy, no peer-to-peer business opportunities. And this Axie moment that we see today would not have been possible if it wasn't for an open data framework, which is what NFTs represent.
Yeah, I want to talk about the growth of play to earn over the next coming years. I think a lot of people beat around the bush with maybe the problems that can occur when you add this blockchain and NFT component. I think I had Jake Brookham from Coin Fund on the other day, who had this analogy of talking about NFTs, and that in the early 1900s, it was probably easier to predict that cars would come to pass, but you could not predict possibly that traffic jams would come to pass. And what are some potential pitfalls here as we move into the play to earn economy, where you might have people working 20 hours a day grinding at a game? How do you model these games where it doesn't become kind of a pit of grindiness, essentially, or scholarships? I feel like we could have a conversation on maybe the potential pitfalls and how to avoid them and how you guys are doing that in your ecosystems.
So first, pitfalls emerge usually when the markets start to mature, right? And so at this moment in time, I feel like we're at a space and time where, because everyone else is building and also competing and building new products around it, that there's going to be the opportunity for people to go elsewhere as well. So meaning that, the self-defense mechanism, I think, around this model being very capitalist is that if Axie no longer provides the appropriate yield in question, because maybe the market has matured, the economy isn't growing the way that it is, or it's got too many people playing, right? There will be a natural equilibrium that comes as market forces come into play, where players go, oh well, maybe I should try another game, maybe I should try another metaverse because I can get better yield out of that. So the point on this is that there is choice, right? So if I can choose to go from Axie to Rev to Sandbox to Tower to Gamey or whatever other ecosystem I would love to go into, then actually that balances itself out, right? The problem, especially historically, is that we've had physical borders, which meant that even if I wanted to find an opportunity elsewhere, I couldn't because travel was expensive. Going somewhere was difficult, right? Maybe I needed a visa. How do I even go there, right? This wasn't possible. So the online world removes a lot of that friction. So I generally feel that, at least in the sort of early to mid stages, there's going to be, I think it's going to be less as exploitative as people fear it might be, because people talk about, people are sort of working for pennies in comparatively speaking. What people don't perhaps appreciate is that, you can't compare the equivalent living standard of your life in New York City to one in a village in the Philippines. Mm-hmm. It is about sort of relative value. The money that they make is life-changing for them there, and it improves their quality of life dramatically in a way that is not meaningful to someone in New York. So they look at it at low labor perspective. And I think I living in Hong Kong, I have a lot of friends in the manufacturing space, and a number of them often lament some of that commentary, in the traditional manufacturing sense, because they're being paid sort of minimum wages or slave wages, and the wages are much lower than they are there. But what people don't recognize is that they do provide employment, and more importantly, that employment isn't exploitative in the local context. It is actually one of value and one that actually helps grow it, right? After all, our forefathers didn't make the same salary as you have, right? Yeah. It's increased over time. It's got to start somewhere. And I think the same is true for everything that's building out in the metaverse, except it's already starting with much more liquidity and much more opportunity in comparison. So I think these pitfalls that we fear for, I think will be mitigated by the fact that there is going to be just naturally more friction, more and more competitive friction and more options for others to go into. But of course, I'll tell you what I worry about more. And what I think has happened is that that people are trying to build, the next Axie or similar type of products in a closed manner, right? And when you build in a closed manner, that is when exploitation begins, because that's when you control everything, right? That's when you try to sort of lock people into your ecosystem. And when you become dependent on it, then you actually can't leave anymore and you rule everything, which is basically our existence in the digital world today.
Mm-hmm.
When Facebook talks about the metaverse not so long ago, right? Everyone goes,
Scary.
okay, it's scary, right? Because, clearly, Mark Zuckerberg is a very smart guy. So he obviously sees it coming. He's not, where he is because he doesn't know what's going on. He definitely knows what's going on, but he wants to fit it in an image that is his and that he can still somehow sort of, not necessarily influence, but perhaps even more control, right? And that to me is what I fear more. Because if we are in an open ecosystem that is actually really open, then the opportunities, I think, will naturally distribute to each other because we all hold ourselves accountable to each other. But if we actually have one that is closed, then you're not holding anyone accountable except you're ruled by one or two parties, which is kind of how the internet works today, and that's no good.
Yeah, I want to talk about the growth of NFTs in developing countries that you mentioned earlier, but since we're on the topic now of control and all these larger firms and larger companies getting into the space, that's a conversation that happens on Twitter a lot as well. Hey, when are these AAA studios getting in? When are these big companies getting in? We see a lot of grassroots projects growing within the NFT space right now. From your perspective, when are I guess we have mythical games for Blizzard, but when are truly the Riot Games and the other large firms that are creating these massive, games right now that are super popular? When are they gonna come around to crypto and NFTs?
So there's a lot of talk amongst the large game companies to do something. Scopely became one of our investors, for instance. And Square Enix is also invested in Sandbox, and Ubisoft obviously has their sort of accelerator and is playing in the space a little bit, but none of them do it in any kind of substance. It's really in the experimental sort of phase for the time being, and that's because these companies are doing very well without blockchain, and they don't have to disrupt their existing business models. I think this is a classic case of an innovator's dilemma. Even though you can see what's happening, for you to change as an organization is very, very risky and actually has perhaps potentially much more negative consequences. So why take it when you don't have to, right? And that makes sense from a traditional sort of business. It doesn't have to just be gaming. I think the same will be true here. I think that with the big sort of game companies are going to try to enter the NFT and sort of market and allow the trading of these assets, very soon. I think they're going to try to do it in the next 12 to 18 months, where they're going to start launching sort of games that have metaverse-like sort of economics, but they're not going to be open, right? Meaning they're going to be closed, they're going to be walled gardens, they're going to be controlled. And I think, to me, this is the fight, really, right? But I also think those closed metaverses are sort of destined long-term to fail, because you can't create sort of the benefits of the full sort of free trade and global economics if they're sort of inside a walled garden. And eventually they'll have to force those borders open. And to me, that might be possibly 4 to 6 years away, kind of similar to what happened to mobile adoption, when they finally realize that they have to join essentially free trade and global trade, as opposed to trying to build their own sort of micro ecosystems. And maybe some of them are large enough and they can create a walled garden of their own because they're big enough. But the rest of us are going to exist in the open metaverse. And those of us who build in the open metaverse are going to build value compounded on each other, kind of like open source. And what that means is that maybe in the beginning, right, just like open source and closed source, there was a fight going on and people wanted to control it as much as possible, up to a point where open source just was running away because it was not possible anymore to compete with the network network effect of the millions of coders that were basically creating better and better and better code at a pace that essentially no company could do in a closed source manner anymore. I think that will happen to NFTs. And at that point, everyone's just going to throw in the towel and say, okay, we got to go open.
I mentioned a couple times that Yacht's been on the episode before. We've done an interview pretty much every year as the NFT space has grown. A lot of predictions that he made on that first interview have come true to this point. Although again, the timeline might be a little bit quicker than both of us, maybe even saw. But Yacht, I'm going to challenge you here. What were some things that in that time that have grown within the NFT industry that maybe you didn't predict happening? Right, that maybe have occurred, or kind of just the way that the NFT space looks now. What are some things that maybe you didn't see happening, or it might be the case that it in general you everything you'd predict has come to pass. But
Well, I mean, no, of course, not everything. Or maybe I wouldn't say predict, although because it wasn't so much that I was making predictions, it was more about assumptions that what would grow faster. I certainly thought that gaming was going to be the faster vehicle towards identification of the value of non-fungible tokens, right? And while if you think about even at the roots of the origins of NBA Top Shot, there was meant to be a gaming element around it, but then it all became about moments, right? And and then afterwards it was art. And I would definitely say that while I obviously have collected some, CryptoPunks and I've collected some art pieces and here and there, really as more to support the ecosystem and some appreciation, did I expect that, you would have basically NFT art be sold at Sotheby's and Christie's, on a regular basis? No, I did not, right? And I'm both fascinated, amazed, and grateful that it happened. But I did not predict that because I would have thought that the mainstream media would have been sort of much less willing to take that on. And we have Metacoven and obviously people to thank for that big explosive moment. However, that was something I didn't predict because art is one of those sort of dark horses that is hard to sort of fully understand, because when you're buying a piece of art, intrinsically you're buying just really creative potential, and it is quite random in the sense that why is a Picasso worth what it is? There's some an analysis you can make, but at the end of the day, it really is in the eye of the collector, right? And they make that market, and that is the hardest part to predict. But what it also helped us shape in that thinking is that in the example of art, is that it is the collectors and it is the community that makes it, that maybe makes it and sort of defines it. And I think that's sort of one of the lessons to take away. Community intrinsically was always critically important. But when you look at something like art, it is the thing, right? If you don't have collectors, you don't have value. And that's, the number one things that I think an artist in this space needs to understand.
the generative art mini bubble that we seem to find ourselves in, where there's like multiple different kind of creations of based on CryptoPunks, right? Where we have Bored Apes, where we have Gutter Cats, and now farther down the line, almost like the ICO space. I just think it's fascinating that all of these communities just popped up. Like these people were just waiting for communities to be there. I mean, we had OniForce, a project that is launching, imminently, and they had 300, 400 people in our live chat, and it was just amazing that these communities were just waiting to exist. What do you make of the generative art bubble that we're in? I know you said you own CryptoPunks, but that's really the other than gaming, that's what's taking over right now is generative art, and the buying and selling and also the community building within it.
Well, so first of all, I think generative art and art in general, I think as we analyze it a little bit sort of deeper, is a very natural fit for the traditional crypto collector as well, or the traditional person in crypto as well, because it's easier to understand. It's also just the decision tree is also faster, and the analysis being mostly on chain is something that is easy to comprehend. One of the struggles with games is if I enter a game, I have to play it first, right? I have to know I have to know the rules. That's a lot of work, right? Actually, if you think about it, right? Whereas if I buy art, it's a much easier decision. I can just get into it, right? And so you do have some of that effect where people just generally sort of for speculative reasons just buy it quickly because generally speaking that served them well. And so you have a marketplace where you have a larger speculative friction in the art world than you have in the gaming utility world, which drives that. And then of course compounded on top of that are the communities built on that who identify with these projects. Now, going a little bit about sort of the identity in the community, I think that's key, because right now we're at a phase still in the development that is so early. We still are only talking about, a couple million people that have NFTs. That's it. I think when we we first spoke in 2019, it was 100,000 or 150,000. Yeah, that was it, right? So the growth explosion we're seeing right now is really a result of people who, from that growth perspective, is just from coming from a low number to a relatively higher but still low number overall, right? And so what we seek for is something that we identify with, and there will be a point where there will be saturation, but it's just market growth. In other words, if you believe that NFT ownership is going to go from 2 million people to 10 million people to 100 million people, then frankly, we're not in the bubble, because the generative art will appeal to someone between the spectrum of 2 to 100, right? Right. So depending on where you think the size of the generative art market exists is where it will probably top out. I think we're kind of early. Now, there's a lot of projects out there that obviously feel very much copycatish, and people don't appreciate that and that kind of stuff. And that will obviously happen as well, because where there's money, there's greed, there's opportunism, and all that kind of stuff that comes into play. It's part of capitalism. I think the maturity will evolve, and people will be looking for projects that feels more earnest to them or more serious for them, and that will naturally weed these other ones out. But in general, I would say that I don't think the generative art or crypto art in general is in a bubble per se. I just think that is the growth is still coming. There'll be bumps on the road, but we're not at the point where we've hit top end of the market in the NFT, frankly, anywhere.
Yeah, and we're really at the baby steps when it comes to the gaming industry. I mean, that's what you're here to talk about as well. Clearly, you're a master when it comes to NFT gaming. We see that vertical starting to really just light the ignition, right? Of just, we are about to take off. Axie Infinity, you mentioned, is an inflection point for the industry when we look back on it in 10, 20 years. So what are you guys doing at Animoca Brands to build this out? I know Rev Motorsport we want to touch on as well, but we want to touch on kind of your full suite of products. What are you guys doing at Animoca to drive this play to earn in this gaming industry forward?
So outside of some of the investments that we've made, and actually one of our most recent investments was actually Nine Chronicles, which has also done quite well, and it sort of is more in the sort of the massively multiplayer range. We also are building our own in those spaces. And again, all of them are open, right? So we want them to interoperate and work elsewhere as well. And to us, that's the important part. And I'll come to that thinking a little bit later, perhaps. But what are we doing? For instance, with Tower, we have a mobile app called Crazy Defense Heroes. You can play and earn the governance token of Tower, and that basically allows you to eventually use NFTs in that game. But really, it's a mechanism in which play to earn. It happens there where my time played inside the game is rewarded. And I can then earn something that I can then use to buy something else that could be used or define the future of that game. And this was sort of an onboarding approach, trying to get people who are not in the crypto world to go into crypto, because we're building out on that thesis that it's going to be hard to get people to go online unless they have value, right? In other words, I'm not going to go through all the work of opening a bank account until I have a check. And once I have a check, I go, I need to open a bank account. How do I do that? And through that process, you are willing to go through the pain of doing that because you've got something on the other side. Because we don't believe that the onboarding must be the simplest of processes. Yes, we need to make a better UX and so on. But if it's so simple, I think then you don't learn about all the other opportunities that exist in the world of DeFi because you want someone to handhold you all the way. I don't think so. It's like opening a bank account. You still need to know the basics of opening a bank account and how to manage your money and how to balance your sort of a checkbook and stuff like that. You still need to know how to do that, right? And that only happens when you actually are earning money, not before. And I think many cases we go the other way around, where we try to make the experience frictionless, but the person doesn't know why. He doesn't understand the reason. And so we're trying to give people sort of rewards first, and then to claim it, they go online. So we do this with Gamey. We're doing this with Gamey as well, which is the hyper casual one where they've got like 80 games that you can play on, and sort of rewards. So these are our funnels to bringing people into play to earn. And then you go into the assets and the ownership, like with the Rev ecosystem, with Sand, right? And very soon with Quid as well, which is coming soon as well. Quid is basically a sort of a collectible marketplace for pop culture. So they've got licenses, for digital collectibles like Marvel and like sort of Disney and Game of Thrones and so on. And of course, with more crypto native ones like Limpo, the Limpo ecosystem, which is focused around athletes and sort of individual sports heroes, right? So we're building out in all of these various ecosystems. And most recently, we also started launching our Olympic NFTs, on Flow, right? And that's also another way to sort of bring in people. And there's going to be a game launched as well for the Olympics that you can then sort of have utility for.
Yeah, I wonder what your experience with Flow is. We definitely have seen multiple blockchains start to attack this. You guys were investors in Wax, as you showed the infographic as well. What do you make of the interoperability nature of all of these blockchains, and where you'll see adoption? Is it going to happen on Ethereum mostly? Is it going to stay within that ecosystem, or do we see products like Flow start to really pick up steam over the coming years?
Well, first, I think Flow has already picking up some steam, right? And but it's not just Flow. I think it's whether you look at Polygon, when you look at Wax, all of them will grow, and even smaller ones like what's happening with Harmony, right? In the NFT space. In fact, I would say that what we ended up doing there, we kind of kickstarted their NFT direction in the early days with the first NFT sale and pushing that audience over there. To us, that is healthy. In fact, we don't want one sort of dominant place to issue NFTs. Although I know that people are trying to do that, but that's just competition, and I think that's good because when there's competition, there's choice. When there's choice, it's good for the consumer, it's good for the service providers, it's good for everyone involved in the space. So we think that's healthy, but I also think it keeps the ecosystem honest. If you have choice, it means you have to add value for you to be on that ecosystem. If you are the dominant provider, then you basically start making the rules. You can deplatform, or you can do other things that that you suddenly sort of are dependent on. So I think that's important. Where's it going to go? Well, I think there's a lot of traction right now, obviously on Flow, also on Polygon, with Matic. And in terms of the interoperability, bridges are being built. We're building bridges ourselves. We think that's really important. But other organizations are building bridges across the board as well, sort of, porting over NFTs, having utility cross-chain. To us, that's the future. And I think the next wave is going to be all about cross-chain interoperability.
Yeah, back to your kind of umbrella of products here. There is probably a token associated with half, maybe a little bit more. Maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe it's all of them. But you have tokens like Rev, Sand, Tower, Gamey, and all of these tokens are kind of inside of these networks, and they provide utility, and they're very integrated there. I want to talk about the DeFi and NFT synergy there. What is the, for someone maybe that's uninitiated, and maybe even for the more initiated, what is the importance of these tokens within these ecosystems? Not just the NFT assets, right? We've touched on the NFT assets probably the whole call, but let's talk about the importance of DeFi and the importance of these fungible tokens within these environments.
DeFi is critical because DeFi provides this layer of liquidity. In fact, what DeFi does is it provides the banking infrastructure of everything that makes it work. For instance, we talk about the Axie Infinity effect, right? And we talked a little bit about how COVID and so on was vitally important to get people to really spend time to play. But there was another thing that was also needed in terms of circumstance. You needed a banking infrastructure, right? You needed a method in which people could cash out. You needed a way in which there was liquidity provisioning, and that was DeFi, right? Because otherwise, things like SLP would just simply not have any function, because someone would have to build out an exchange and would have to build their own sort of services around it, and that would have been difficult to do. But because DeFi was there, you could do that. And that particular liquidity was also able to tap into all the rest of the liquidity because people could trade in and trade out of that ecosystem. Meaning that even though I don't necessarily own that token or maybe have an interest in it, I have a way to get exposure to it because I'm part of that larger ecosystem. So really, one way to look at the token outside of things like governance and so on is that once you issue a token, you basically create the interface that plugs into DeFi. And that plug into DeFi gives you access to the liquidity, essentially to Wall Street. If you don't have access to Wall Street and you don't have access to the capital markets, then generally speaking, your business size and economic opportunity tends to be smaller. This is true for the real world as well, right? It's not just true in DeFi. And where things were when we flipped upside down a bit is that because of the nature of the token and because many of the original projects that came out had no utility whatsoever, just a great white paper. And it attracted really a strong base of speculators mostly in the early days because the token had no utility. So the only thing you could do was potentially speculate and hope it would go somewhere. And that was the beginning of that, and created all the issues that we saw in 2017, 2018, 20, sort of up to 2019, right? But when NFTs entered the space, they ended up becoming the value layer around that. Suddenly, I had a use case. The banking infrastructure could actually provide services to merchants because now there was something to service, right? It's a little bit like the bank came first before a property that you needed to mortgage, right? Normally, you needed the property and the service first, and then you say, actually, let me see how I can leverage that better. Here comes the bank and gives you a connection. It happened upside down with blockchain, but it was still needed, right? So I think there's a critical interdependence between DeFi and sort of really digital property rights.
Yeah, we were really fundraising the space if you think about it back then in 2017 with all these ICOs, right? People had ideas that they needed to create. Some of those became great products. A lot of those became nothing. But let's talk about the future here for play to earn and gaming and Animoca. Like you made predictions in 2019 and 2020 about the NFT space, most of which came true. Where are we headed in 2022, 2023, and how are you guys positioning yourselves to kind of I guess, capitalize on that growth?
Well, so first, I think, play to earn has really sort of met its initial moment. As I said, right, it's kind of like the sort of Angry Birds moment has arrived, which basically means to me two things. One, there's going to be an explosion of new companies trying to enter the space, as we've seen with mobile gaming before, or gaming in general. It's like, oh, look at Angry Birds. Let me make my own type of game, right? So you see that already sort of happening, in the space, which also means that there's going to be more capital. That means there's more development. And yes, not all of them will work out, but because of the large amounts of capital inflow, it means that that space essentially is going to be very well invested, and new high quality products are going to come out in that space, right? So that's the first point, just on a macro standpoint. To me, I think we're going to have possibly within the next 12 months, the first big AAA type of sort of gaming experiences that we expect to see in AAA gaming basically enter into the world of NFTs and blockchain gaming, right? Meaning, and the reason I say that is because with Angry Birds and Mafia Wars back in the early days of mobile, or Pretty Petsalon, right? Those were the early type of simple games. You had a hardware restriction. The hardware actually didn't allow you to make better games because there was issues with bandwidth and issues with size and memory and so on. But blockchain gaming doesn't have that particular restriction. The restriction was capital, right? It was the fact that in the early days, I mean, again, right, Axie's first round was like $800,000, right? What can I do with $800,000? I can do this, right? And it's going to get better, and it's well funded, and it's going to get much, much better and much improved. But the point is that now when you start a game that's already starting with multi-million-dollar film style budgets, right, you're going to basically get quality from the get-go. And that to me is the trigger point where a traditional gamer will say, actually, that looks just very interesting to play, and then get introduced into this world. Because his first instinct when he looks at a game like Axie Infinity, or even the original F1 Delta Time, is, well, that's not the kind of game I want to play, because from a gameplay standpoint, it's not what I expect to see, because he's expecting a AAA experience, right? But now that will change. So I think that's going to happen, right? And we see a lot of projects. We're involved in a lot of projects that are basically moving towards that moment, and we are basically gearing up everything around it. Even if you think about what's happening with Rev, we've launched the alpha, and if you play the game, it's actually front person sort of driving with the physics, and yeah, it's not perfect, but it's the beginning of actually a real proper racing experience. It is the first blockchain game that has actual physics driving with sort of rewards that are tied in. And once the sort of graphics are going to improve and the quality will improve, as it will over time, you're going to have essentially, a AAA driving gaming experience, but on blockchain with play to earn and true digital ownership.
Yeah, a lot of the community saw me playing that racing game, and I didn't do very well on those turns. But yeah, from a user interface perspective, I mean, it didn't seem any different than a racing game that I would see playing on the computer, as far as the mechanics go. So I definitely appreciated that, and the ability to earn while you're doing that is obviously really cool. So this is going to happen. We know it. You said about a year time frame. The other thing we're kind of dancing around is the fact that it takes time to create these. One of the reasons art and generative art specifically, probably, and collectibles probably came first, because they don't take that much time. It's a really low hanging fruit to say I'm going to spend in some cases a week creating these tools and raise $1 million or sell out. Games take a long time, specifically AAA studios. So
Correct.
if it's coming in a year, it has to be being built right now. So
That's right.
do you have yeah, do you have predictions on what? Can you name some names as it comes to that?
I so because we're involved in these projects, I can't name them at the
Okay.
moment, but stay tuned on Animoca Brands because we will be sort of announcing some of that stuff. But yes, the
Okay.
short answer is we are in the know of stuff that has been developed for a while. Even for us as Animoca Brands, we haven't basically just been sort of sleeping on the wheel and just sort of saying, hey, great investments we made and nice for Sandbox and Rev, and let's just hang out. We've basically been pushing the envelope time and time again, right? And
Mm.
so what you've seen in the beginning was generation one, but we are a game studio after all, right? We've made certain kind of games. If you look at the quality of the studios of our games, whether it's games like the WWE game or games like Power Rangers or what comes out from like the Peanuts game or whatever, those are games where the quality is actually quite high, right? And those are the experiences that we think we need to bring to blockchain and non-fungible tokens. And so the stuff coming out from us and our portfolios that hopefully will blow all of you away and really pave the way for that next big wave of GameFi.
So excited for that, man. As a longtime gamer, it's just we're at the cusp. We're right here. It couldn't be a better time in the game industry to just be involved in the space. So really excited for all of that. I appreciate the building that you guys are doing. How are you doing in real life, by the way? I'm sure like your real life, you have things going on there, of course, IRL. How is everything going in real life?
I mean, real life is great. But I think the only thing I'm not getting enough of is sleep.
Mm,
But I think the circumstances here is that I think right now sleep is underrated because of the fact there's so much important stuff to do.
mm.
And I wake up every day being really excited about what I do, right? I think I feel blessed that I can be working in a space that is rewarding, that is fun, and that is meaningful, right? And I think this is the stage where we're at. And I think everyone who's in the space recognizes that, can sort of see that happen. And I think now, especially because of the resources we have, we had a big fundraise, but the business is doing quite well as well. Everything is sort of, generally clocking sort of, upwards. We have the resources to execute on the vision much more effectively than we did before, right? I mean, 3 years ago, we were, not as cashed up and not as successful. Therefore, we didn't have the ability to deploy quite the way I wanted to, because if I could, right, back then, I would have given more money to everyone. But I was resource constrained. So fine, here we go. So to us, we're still there. And I think the other thing that we're really trying to be conscious about, and that's a philosophy of how we build and invest, is we want the open space to sort of get there faster. Because if the open metaverse becomes bigger and bigger in a fast way, it essentially sort of blocks the sort of attempts to try to create a walled garden because it no longer makes sense. Right. So that's what really, when you think about, oh, we're making all these investments or we're making all of these acquisitions and all the stuff we're doing, that is what we're in a hurry for. We want to make sure that this space stays as open as possible.
I love the work you guys are doing. It wouldn't be the same without you, honestly. I think you guys are doing so much work from again, capital standpoint, but also just coming on these podcasts, explaining in a very clear way the value for NFTs, all of these different things you guys are attacking. So, yeah, it's always a pleasure. We've been on here for about 50 minutes, so I think we'll let this go for another time. Hopefully, that other time is very soon. I'd love to have you on here every month if I could, but thank you so much for coming on, man.
Well, so thank you very much. And we do have a little bit of a sort of teaser. Yes, if you want to share
Yes,
that.
I will share this for the community that is watching. Yacht surprised me this morning right before the call that there is a Rev Motorsport, Rev Racing asset that is going to be added this week. I'm going to share that with you now. It's going to go up on my screen. And Yacht, if you want to, I have it up on my screen now. Do you want to kind of lay it out here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, one of the things that we've done with Rev Racing is we're basically giving away many of these cars. You can trade them. These are level 1 cars. You can use them in Rev Racing. But some of them that have more special skins actually end up having some value that's beyond the base price. But really, you need those cars to basically upgrade them into the next level. but really it's an appreciation to you as a community to sort of, keep sort of, following, building, sort of participating in that space, and we wanted to make this more inclusive, which is why we were doing a lot of these free car drops, because that's how we bring more people into the space, right? And Rev Racing, when it launched just like less than a week ago, actually became the #1 game on Polygon, in terms of volume of users. And I think, again, this is sort of testament to the space and the scale we're at the moment. So please, I think you're going to be doing something there, obviously, in terms of how you can earn it. Pay attention to, obviously,
Yeah.
what the LADZ network will have to offer. And we welcome you to give Rev Racing a try with these assets.
Absolutely. We'll have the details for you guys after the episode. We'll kind of iron all that out so that you guys can get your hands on this throwback. That is a layer 1 throwback right there from way back in the day. So comments are coming through. Everybody's saying fire. That looks sick. Nice. So everyone's super appreciative that you guys dropped that on us this morning. Yeah, you guys have been a friend of the channel for a while. And I just want to thank you, honestly, for everything you've been able to do. So appreciate it. Guys, we had a great episode here. If you want to check out Animoca Brands, I'll have all the links in the description. And a fantastic interview. We'll have Yat on again soon. Yat, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.